The Abyss's ultimate agenda. Octavia and the planet-hopping witches. Possible Nibelung resurgence? And the Traveler's growing ability to become a wellspring of abyssal energy primed to end the world again. You guys may not realize it, but Luna 2 was filled with clues that lead to some interesting implications. I'm the unlikely Genshin gamer, and I have a lot to say without a lot of time to say it. References will be in the screen corner again when relevant. And we'll get this party started with the star of the show, Rerir. So, by now everyone has already hashed over Rerir's characterization and whether or not he's worthy of the title of most murderous villain in Genshin. But there is compelling evidence for a necessary distinction between Rerir the Sinner and Rerir the NPC that takes place at the moment when he's disintegrated by the Moongate. Basically, there is Rerir, the guy who's invested in making a normal life for he and his girlfriend, and Rerir, the Abyss puppet, who's trying to open a Moongate to take out the stars. To understand why I say this, we have to compile up a few clues from around the place, including a statement from Nicole coming all the way from the Songs of the Welkin Moon trailer. The most important clue, though, is what Albedo said after Durin and Varka helped him slice up some wild hunt mobs for research purposes.
It's a strange mix. The furious energy of an abyssal being channeled through a fractured physical existence. A consequence of being torn apart by an unknown power. Perhaps the only explanation for his survival in this state is that he sacrificed a degree of individuality in exchange for a continued existence. Oh, sorry. Once I get talking about interesting research, I have a tendency to go on indefinitely. Back to our research findings. Essentially, they confirm my hypothesis. Rerir's corpse is completely contaminated by the Abyss, and the effects are irreversible. You could think of this as Rerir in mutated form. But in my view, even that would be inaccurate. In reality, his whole being has been consumed by the Abyss. In other words, he is now nothing more than a manifestation of abyssal power. Unfortunately, at present, we have no means of completely eradicating abyssal power. Hence, we cannot fundamentally destroy the Rerir of Volnire either.
An abyssal being. And exchanged individuality for a continued existence. Basically, Rerir, the love-stricken man, with overflowing blood in his hands, partook in a share of the abyssal gift with the other sinners, so he could try to figure out some way to defy fate and make things work out with Felindis. Then, while infused with abyss energy, he jumps into the Moongate that Felindis opened, or the moon's reflection, as Columbina called it. Except that didn't go so well. He's torn apart for some reason, and strewn through space and time. To stay alive, he trades out what makes him an individual so he can become an undying abyss hive mind instead. Something that doesn't only represent Rerir's goals anymore. So, Rerir without his body back is very much just an abyssal thought. An avatar of the abyss with a very specific agenda. And if you listen to this guy really closely at times, he hardly sounds like a man at all. He sounds like a very old, powerful being who is wiser than you might imagine.
Humans, you never change. Always trying to use powers you neither comprehend nor control. The zealous worship of power leads only to annihilation of equally zealous proportions. True power does not heed the commands of the weak.
Come on, dude. Last I heard, you were a human too, until you became confetti.
I can barely muster 10% of my original strength. You've ruined everything again.
What do you mean? We know now that you went right back to the Universitas Magistrorum to find Thelindis, and then jumped to your death. You didn't get to take your new abyssal powers for a spin, except to open said gate. So what's all this lost power he's talking about?
You too have the potential to be driven mad by knowledge. But the truths you seek are so insipid, how laughable that you should die for their sake.
How do you know what I'm looking for? And on that note, where did Rerir ever get the chance to learn what the traveler's relationship with their sibling was like, so he could copy it? By all accounts, he was a nobody in the royal court. He probably never got to see them except from afar or in the news. And I'd argue no one in Khaenri'ah knew what their relationship was like, because they didn't reunite until the cataclysm was well underway, and then only for a short while. That privileged knowledge that let Abyss Rerir pull off a pretty convincing imitation was all the Abyss is doing. I mean, you have to admit, it sounds like when we're talking to Gasoithoth or something. Not a guy who took on a lot of power to find his lost love. Rerir has come across like the devil himself at times, because the Abyss is pretty much all he is now. Lastly, this crash out after the botched resurrection sounds like all of Rerir's memories from just before he jumped into the gate were flooding back into his mind.
Vedrfolnire, Rhine-daughter, Thelindis.
I wouldn't be surprised if the ghostly Rerir didn't even remember Thelindis at the time. Without the heart component of the resurrection, which the traveler messed up, Abyss Rerir and love-stricken Rerir seem to not be completely in sync, if you ask me. All of this is not to say Rerir is excused. No. I'm much more interested in what the Abyss could be using the sinner to accomplish. If Rerir gave up his individuality, then what does the collective, known now as Rerir, want? I wager it's connected to the gate that the Abyss has been working to get opened for a long time now. Also, I'm very curious to know why it is that the moon gate they jumped into led them to be scattered in nod-krai. And yes, I do mean them, because I think some of the wild hunt phenomenon, like the unexplained sighting in Vedrfolnire that Inefa went to investigate, is due to Thelindis. As a child of the Crimson Moon, perhaps she has enough abyss flowing through her veins to survive too. And becoming a collective mind means some of her thoughts and desires were probably mixed in with Rerir's. But really, the wild hunt phenomenon, which has been directly linked to Rerir, is only in Nodkrai. Was the gate they ignorantly opened a portal to the failed moon of Nodkrai? It's said that Nodkrai was going to be another moon which failed to form. Maybe from the time when the dragons of Natlan were trying to make a moon because of Nibelung's absence. So, could it be that because they didn't understand what they were doing, the moon gate didn't go to the right place? I don't know, but I'm interested in what you all think. Now, with all this talk about the Abyss and its possible agenda, that it's looking to execute through Rerir and maybe even the other sinners, we need to straight up dive deeper into what the Abyss is and just how intelligent it could be. According to Nazissenkreuz, the Abyss, just like moon power, is a power with a will. The power of each moon goddess is and was linked in some way to what they wanted, and it seems the Abyss can think too. And if it has a will, then it stands to reason it has a goal. To better describe this frightening entity, I'm going to touch on something I haven't seen many other people referring to. That is the Lunar Arcanum cards. Cryptic doesn't even begin to describe them, but if you look closely, some of them stand out. I'm eventually going to address the Hanged Man, the Fool, and the Devil. The devil is merely a mask through which the power of darkness is revealed. Well, it is an established fact that the abyss is largely sealed out of Teyvat. Skirk says it's at lower levels than many other places she's been, but it is a universal force that exists everywhere all at once. It's not just a place, it's a power source, and something that wishes things to be a certain way. If Octavia the Witch and the Voyager of Nibelung's time are speaking about the same thing, then the abyss is the destruction. It always seeks to return life to its inert last and first stage of nothingness. Remember, the Aranara call it Morana, the memory of death. See, my child, all that lies under the throne of heaven shall be destroyed in upheaval. The pitch-dark void shall embrace us all. The abyss leaked into Teyvat in a tremendous amount through Khaenri'ah because the Vinster King found out that when the traveler sucks up abyss energy, supposedly erasing it, they are just holding it inside of themselves. A bottomless repository of power. Remember how Lauma described the traveler holding the moon marrow in themselves? And we see how from time to time, Columbina requests a sip of this almost infinite wellspring of power when she needs a pick-me-up. Well, Ermin the Vinster King did the same thing to the traveler's sibling in Khaenri'ah, having told them that they were the heir to the throne of Khaenri'ah and the hope of all his people. Except Ermin didn't ask for a sip. He was drunk on it, going more and more mad by the day. And on that night that Dane went to save his brother and set the kingdom aright, a huge amount of that stolen power was released at once, providing the sinners with their share. Dane and the traveler's paths were intertwined from that moment, and the abyss was in the world on a large scale now. The source for the traveler's extractions was very likely the Crimson Moon, who was super intermingled with the abyss because of her unnatural resurrection. In fact, if the people of the Crimson Moon had the power of the abyss running through their veins like Arlecchino, then maybe, a source for the power and the reason for the increased killings was to siphon abyss power from the bodies of those Rerir was sent to execute. Either way, the Traveler became a great big leak in the Heavenly Principle's sealant system against the abyss, and enough of it was brought into the world to destroy multiple worlds. Our Traveler probably doesn't realize, especially since they said that they don't know where the abyss power goes when they purge it, that they could be growing into a similar time bomb of abyss energy, just like their sibling, who facilitated the sinners' access to world-shattering power. If someone learns how to suck it back out of them, Teyvat is going to be in big, big trouble. But I digress. The abyss wanted into Teyvat, likely to destroy it. And the reason the sinners knew at all to come and take a share was because it inveigled them to. The greatest, most powerful, or just most desperate among the people of Khaenri'ah. Those in whose heart was the capacity to make a deal with the devil. Rerir wasn't hearing Vedrfolnire in his head, urging him to despair. He heard the voice that he most trusted to know what it was talking about. The devil disguised as the visionary, who unfairly knows everything. And interestingly, the serpent that represented Vedrfolnire in the chess game, the one I think is the serpent in the battle pass, also seems to be the serpent that was worshipped in Enkanomiya. The same golden headpiece can be seen on both of them. Could it be the world serpent, who knows everything It's not Orobashi because we know what he looks like. Perhaps this entity is where Vedrfolnir had gotten all his clairvoyant powers from to begin with, unknowingly. But then he was blinded, and now he was a man most desperate as well, prime for the taking. So he heard a voice too, but I bet you it wasn't his own. It was whatever voice mattered or held the most weight for him, maybe even the voice that all his visions came in.
Why are you doing all this?
My voice? In your head? So, you hear it too? The voice that steals your mind, gains your trust, and drives you crazy. It turns out that we are not so different, you and I.
Vedrfolnir just broke into the strangest smile I've ever seen in my life, as if he'd discovered some monumental secret. But then he suddenly switched to looking extremely weary.
Notice Vedrfolnir's reaction. That wasn't because he was found out. It's because he realized he wasn't alone. That the voices wanted them both to do something. The Abyss has proven since Natlan that it has the alarming ability to impersonate others. Now we know it can do it to voices in one's head as well. With access to the memories and the ley lines, it knows quite a lot to make a convincing act. Now, if it's true that the Abyss has a goal, then it stands to reason that the project to seduce the would-be sinners was a part of that goal. I think it's to annihilate Teyvat. What it was having Rerir do, its most loyal subject no doubt, is collect Kuvaki and eventually the moon marrow, which the Lindis theorized was a key to a gateway. Columbina also called it a path to the moon. Maybe it can lead one all the way to the stars.
Beyond the moonlight's reach, an ancient shadow brandishes its hunting claws, taking aim at the stars.
Since the morning stars were actually real, entities that the Moon Sisters were said to adore, the Abyss could very well be aiming for them for some reason. When the Abyss drove the mad monk to madness, the crazed researcher of Khaenri'ah, who eventually became the previous cryo-archon's trusted advisor, he too became specifically infatuated with searching for a gate that was said to be in Nodkrai. The other suspicious ability of the Abyss is how it forces things to defy death. That theme was repeated a couple times in these quests actually. Case in point, the Crimson Moon Goddess. It's clear now that her people were worshipping her after she was Abyss contaminated, but before she ended up in that sealed off space. When that happened, and her priest failed to provide the people with an answer as to where she was gone, or how to get her back, a coup toppled the dynasty, leading to the Eclipse Kings. But somehow, Solnari, which must have been her name based on Rerir's title, had an actual bloodline connected to her, with people different from the norm. Could the Crimson Moon Scions, strongest in the royal family and unique among their peers overall, have been Khaenri'ah's Fae? A race of people directly linked to the sinister red light of that moon, just like how Koithar had Fae like Flynn's spun from moonlight in Hyperborea. The Fae are children of moonlight in Nodkrai. The Jinn are Sumeru's moon children. Oceanids of Fontaine were said to be children of the angels, which are moon maidens, and apparently the wolves of Mondstadt are children of moonlight as well. And every one of these peoples are special beyond humans. So maybe Crimson Moon Scions actually aren't real humans. I wonder if a similar persecution of moon people is what happened in Snezhnaya, why so many Fae, including Flynn's, left when power shifted from Bel Yisar to the Tsaritsa, who I think was his wife. Strange people with uncommon powers always breed fear and misunderstanding. Maybe that's how the Crimson Moon persecution started, But it was also because they had some sort of perceived curse, which I think was the abyss side of the moonlight running in their veins, like Arlecchino's. Either way, despite the king's best efforts, these children of the Crimson Moon, led by Thelindis, managed to bring their beloved moon out of its isolated space and into the normal sky. And that's what truly caused the cataclysm. A red moon shining over the land was one of the main features of that event. An abyssal moon fueling complete destruction, and 5 willing puppets helping to perpetuate the damage. All because someone once deemed to be dead and gone was held together and aloft like a grotesque doll by the power of the abyss. The Devil card says, "The devil is merely a mask, through which the power of darkness is revealed. The God who creates and maintains, the abyss that consumes and destroys. That infinite, boundless, perpetual age of enlightenment." Can the abyss truly impersonate anyone, though? Can the one called the Primordial One, the so-called progenitor god of Teyvat, really be nothing more than a puppet of the abyss? The card implies that the creator and destroyer of Teyvat are one and the same, which I once suggested. Good cop and bad cop. Explaining why the Tsaritsa blames the heavenly principles for the cataclysm instead of Khaenri'ahs. If the abyss can hold anything alive that has given over their soul to it, then no one we've been told is dead should be taken for granted as being such. And some people may be imposters. This could mean that Nibelung could be alive, somewhere refusing to die, contaminated like Xiaocoatl the Pyro Sovereign was in his last days. The old Dragon King had put his trust in the abyss to help him win the war against the heavenly principles. I doubt he easily accepted defeat if there was another way. And Apep said he'll be back someday. On the other hand, could the fight between Nibelung and the Primordial One, which was said to have severely damaged the Primordial One, really have killed him? Could the one who instigated the Archon War afterwards, naming his 7 new overseers after demons, be the Demiurge, as I proposed in my video about the Hymns of the Far North book? A fake Primordial One? Maybe not, but as Nefer puts it, don't trust your eyes uncritically. And I have constantly wondered that if the dragons hated the abyss as much as the heavenly principles did, and could make peace with the humans that the usurpers stole their world away for, why couldn't they team up with the heavenly principles to get rid of the abyss? Enemy of my enemy and such. Unless they were one and the same. According to another card, the abyss, which indulges in falsehoods so craftily, also ironically deals in unerring truths. The Hanged Man card talks about the man who traded strength for wisdom, just like Anaxa, just like King Odin in Norse mythology, just like Vedrfolnire, who unwittingly traded both eyes for the ability to see the fates of millions, seemingly without limitation. And apparently, King Ermin also traded an eye for knowledge, knowledge that ended his kingdom. The path where strength is sacrificed for human wisdom is that of the Hanged Man, who seeks to glimpse the mysteries of the demonic heavens hanging from the white tree. Though the intelligence that mortals grasp is flawed, it cannot be said to be false. Quite the opposite. For reflected in his inverted eyes is a pure truth, illuminated beneath infinite brilliance. Sounds like what Abyss Rerir said about humans trying to grasp power they can't control. Or as Rukkhadevata said, a knowledge that cannot be comprehended. Speaking of control, something you all can manage to keep in check is how much you have to spend to get Primogems for the upcoming banners. Durian and Yehoda are around the corner, and if you're in the market for some discount gems, and don't mind helping me out, then check out the sponsor of today's video, Top Up Live. Top Up Live is a top-up service for a wide variety of games at a discount price compared to the in-game store. You can get Primo Gems, Chronal Nexus, Stellar Jades, and more for like 20% off the normal price, sometimes even more. And if you use my code at checkout, you'll get an extra 12% off the already discounted price. So it's basically a win-win if you were already planning to buy some discount gems. And you're gonna need them with all the great characters on the way. My Varka fund will not be jeopardized for anyone. So, use my code LIKE at checkout or the special link in the description for an extra 12% off. And thanks again for the support. Now, all that aside, a more plausible idea is that the Heavenly Principles isn't gone, or at least whoever's there is doing an excellent job of imitating them. Because as a Descender, the Primordial One's iron-fisted control over fate in the land of Teyvat remains unbroken. Let's review what the Descender is one more time, so you see why it's such a mighty title, why it has nearly nothing to do with the ley lines specifically, and why Nibelung is pretty much certainly the second one. Believe it or not, the Miliastra Wonderland craftsman level path was the clue that pulled everything together. Notice how a Descender is the most powerful world creator there can be? And just beneath them are the Dreamweavers, obviously the witches like Octavia who found the mannequins. Beneath them are likely the Archons, the Vision Holders, and lastly, normal people. Pair this with what Nazissenkreuz said about the Descender, and it all makes perfect sense. Not everything from outside the universe can be called a presence or variable. But it seems I overlooked one nonetheless. You. The witness of all, the recorder of all, the designer of all. Only one who is worth a world can bear that title. So then, doesn't this mean that a Descender is less someone outside of the scope of the ley lines, and instead is quite simply one who has the power and might of will to create, destroy, sustain, or change an entire world? The witches can change the dream overlaying the world, as in the perception of it, a sort of surface-level ley line editing. Think of it like modding the Heavenly Principles game without changing the underlying code. But only the Primordial One, the Traveler, Seralainen, who is very likely previous Ajax, and Nibelung could hold such a title as one who can create or destroy the whole damn thing. A native of a world such as Nazissenkreuz could have been one, as he so desperately hoped, except for the fact that something created can't escape the confines set by its own creator. That's why, if you're a part of the ley line systems, you can forget about it. Nibelung is such a creator though, meaning he must be a Descender. He's not an outsider or alien to Teyvat. He's quite simply above the rules because he made them. If humankind was brought to Teyvat by the Primordial One, as the dragons say, then Nibelung was the second entity of such power that they ever encountered in their entire history, thus gaining the title of the second Descender. Remember, the Heavenly Principles took over Teyvat while Nibelung was away. But the fight between two entities that have the power to stamp out planets, generate moons, redirect the sun, or repattern the stars, would be the sort of fight to end the existence of a world and shatter its moons. Which brings me to the Fool card in the Arcanum, the most straightforward one. A drifting star that even the fortune that wove the world could not imprison. To the master of the cage, a path with no design has always been inexcusable folly. See that? To the Primordial One, a path that has not been preordained by him is inexcusable folly. Probably because they can mess up his precious plans like Nibelung almost did. And it sounds very much like the enemy of eternity. The Shogun recognized the traveler for what they were right away. someone who doesn't follow the rules is bound to end the game at some point. An obstacle to eternity. No wonder she said her ideal is the closest to that of the Heavenly Principles. If the Heavenly Principles wants Teyvat to exist despite the destruction, forever and ever, like how Raiden wants Inazuma to continue on for infinity, then uncontrolled variables must be removed. And yet, I am the void at the moment of creation. I'm the newborn spark when all things end. My traveling pack is empty. I have only this pure white companion by my side. I will mock all desire, glory, and reason. I will tread the sevenfold steps. One star rises in the heavens, one star falls in the valley. The two have always been the same. All hopes rest on the traveler, the newest descender, because they truly can, once they properly realize it, oppose the Heavenly Principles. I wonder, if Raiden thinks that the traveler's opposition to the Heavenly Principles could spell the end of Inazuma, will she stand by them or not? Of course, the traveler could also bring a new brand of eternity. Of the Primordial One's adversaries, Nibelung has been dealt with, at least for now, and Seralainen has been divided into pieces. But the traveler was not destroyed as they should have been by Asmodee. The script is already shifting. In fact, I want to bring attention to the people of Fontaine before Neuvillette fixed them, because I think they present a very interesting case of things not going the way the Primordial One designed because of the interference of the fourth descender. Ever wonder why Egeria and the Oceanid people of Fontaine were such a problem? I think it's because since they weren't proper humans, they were not a proper part of the script. I would hazard that normal Fontainians didn't have constellations, which dictates one's fate. At least not until they got a vision, which is why Nazissenkreuz was so adamantly against it. Fontainians had a rare opportunity. They were a race of humans, living in the world of Teyvat, whose path had not been ordained for them. For this folly, they were meant to be completely dissolved away. But for this very reason, when the right circumstance appeared to nudge the plot in a different direction, their ordained fate was averted. In other words, Fontainians avoided the fate of being drowned and dissolved, even though escape from one's destiny is impossible, because they didn't have destinies. Nazissenkreuz realized this long before anyone else did. That's why he said only if they received a vision by some error, then would they be caged to the fate of this world. Now, they are real humans, but their path is still free because they are under the Hydro Dragon now as original children of the Primordial Sea. And Neuvillette is a diligent father. He isn't a descender, but he isn't a part of the Heavenly Principles' plans either. And he intends to set things right. All of Fontaine's people are basically blank slates, waiting to write their own destinies now. Because the traveler was there in the pages of the story to help the pieces fall into place just the right way. The ones with visions still had to follow their script though, because if you've been written into the false sky, you can't escape. Vedrfolnire actually teaches us just how all-consuming these preordained paths are. The very existence of a visionary is evidence of pre-existing storylines.
I do wonder whether giving a man the power to see the future does nothing more for him than slowly crush his spirit. In matters of fate, answers are either right or wrong. What will be and what will not. Maybe you are willing to pay a certain price in the pursuit of happiness, but unfortunately, fate does not negotiate. That is the cruelest thing about fate. It is unmoved by your sacrifices.
What a hopeless worldview, and yet it's accurate for most. Put another way, think of fate as a book, already written. Characters follow their scripts line by line. Visionaries are able to look ahead in the book. The more powerful the visionary, the further they can see, and the more individual storylines they can comprehend. Vedrfolnir at his height could predict that Sirtologi was going to leave Teyvat and find a disciple out there amidst the unknown, and that one day the stars will bow in her honor. That's a script line Sirtologi can't escape, no matter how much abyss power he has. Vedrfolnir said, "You are now free, and none now may prescribe you. Yet, your destiny remains bound to that of this world." What he sees comes true, unless it's to do with a variable like the Traveler. The current fight against the Primordial One is a battle that the people are likely to lose, unless they actually do place all their hopes in a different descender, and equip him or her with the knowledge of just how much power they wield and a plan to use it. The Tsaritsa's rebellion will only be able to reach the levels of genius rebels before her like Deshret and Remus, who still utterly failed, unless she's able to make the Traveler understand and adopt her plan completely. Then she'll be able to imagine the notes of her own symphony, as Remus liked to put it, and then have the new descender write the music. While we are talking about people who can escape destiny, we have to talk about the witches again. Because whether or not you like the Miliastra Wonderland expansion, the opening cutscene explaining the Wonderland and the witches who created it sheds a lot of light on what they can do. To recap the small cutscene, somewhere out in the universe there was a world with a people who were extremely fond of escaping their reality by spending all their time in a dreamscape. Just like the people of Penacony in Honkai Star Rail. Except instead of entering this land of perfection through a pool of water, they entered into terminals called mannequins. However, eventually, the reality of their dying world caught up to them, and the world was destroyed along with their fantasy world, despite how much they had ignored the coming destruction. A wandering observer of worlds, someone who was herself fleeing from the destruction, named Octavia, stopped by this world on her way. While exploring it, she snagged 2 intact mannequins from the ruins, adding them to her collection of oddities. She tried creating numerous wonderlands with them, but found herself lacking in inspiration that would really bring the worlds to life. She decided to visit Teyvat and catch up with some old friends, the wandering witches of the Hexenzirkel. Since the Wings of Delicacies seems to describe a conversation between Alice and the tired owner of an intergalactic rest stop, I'd say most of the witches are capable of planet hopping. The witches created many wonderlands together, like the Veluria Mirage, the Golden Apple Archipelago, and Simolanka, because as Dreamweavers, they have the power to manipulate Teyvat like this. Like I said, you can very much think of it as adding mods to the ley lines, like how people do to all sorts of other games, including this one. They alter your perception of it, but don't otherwise damage or change the code. Octavia eventually realized that a truly captivating story needs a protagonist to bring it to life, and before she moved on, careful not to linger too long lest the destruction catch up to her, she left us her terminals and the capability to be Dreamweavers of our own. Now, as sweet and interesting as that all may be, the biggest takeaway is the scope of power the Hexenzirkel have, and why it is said that they primarily study Irminsul. They are very much separate from the leyline system of Teyvat and love to tinker with it. They just aren't descenders. And now, Skirk's voice line about Alice makes more sense.
As the sustainer of the world's borders, she tolerates my presence. But she did make me promise not to interfere too much with this world's affairs. That was fine by me, but I had to know the reason why. She said many ecologists find it emotionally overwhelming when they observe the animal kingdom and see the predators hunting and the prey fleeing. But they'll never interfere in the process. Instead, they allow the laws of nature to take precedence over their own emotions. In her own words, Some call this being a callous observer, but I think it's merciful at the same time.
I must confess that while working out the programming logic for my Wonderland, I found myself killing a defenseless hilichurl over and over again. And even as I felt a bit sorry for it, I said, well, it really is only an aspect of a game anyway, even if perhaps it laments the unfairness. And then I laughed and realized this is probably how Alice saw things while making a hilichurl launching device in Mondstadt. For the most part, she seems to be rather reluctant to interfere in any real way, unlike her sister witch, Rheindotter, who probably observes the world in the same way, but with no qualms about making a mess while playing around in it. While realizing how much power the witches have, this ability to edit grand dreams essentially, I was reminded of the description we have for an item from the beginning of the game. Dream Solvent. Dream Solvent dissolves that which is obtained from memory and transforms it into some other dream. Alchemy at its most primitive could be said to be the beginning of editing the dream, like a level 1 crafter. I will say that this background to the witches and the lore behind the Wonderland did pique my interest in this game mode, which is why I was there unintentionally torturing a hilichurl. In time, I plan to release a compelling quest game based on the story I wrote, and I'd appreciate it if you all checked it out when it's released. Now, before I can wrap this all up, we have to touch on the surprise exposition on the Nazissenkreuz gang at the end of the quest by Sandrone. It was pretty much an after-credit scene, and since Nazissenkreuz and his research have stayed relevant over all these years, I think it's worth looking into, especially since I think her breakdown gives us a major clue to her identity. And no, I don't think she's Marianne exactly, but in a sense she could be. If you're interested in the full story of the Nazissenkreuz gang, you can check out my 2-part video on it in the description. But the necessary quick recap goes like this. In the years before the Cataclysm, there was a premier orphanage in Fontaine called the Nazissenkreuz Institute, run by an original Oceanid named Lyris and one of the Fontaine Navy's best captains. It took in some of the best and brightest of Fontaine's orphans. 4 such kids were René, Jacob, Alain, and Marianne. René was the son of the mayor of Poisson, whose parents died in an uprising that the court of Fontaine brutally squashed. René grew up to be the frighteningly enlightened genius Nazissenkreuz. Jacob, whose father had been one of the leaders of the Poor People's Rebellion, became René's brother when they were eventually adopted by the same man. Alain and Marianne were natural siblings, and she was Alain's favorite person in the entire world. The only other thing that sparked his interest were machines. He and René were rivals and friends until René's field of research became too eccentric and amoral. Alain became the father of clockwork mecha at a young age, mastering the push and pull properties of Numa and Oisia, and some of his prototypes were so freakishly far ahead of his time that since the plans were eventually destroyed at his own request, Fontaine's best researchers still haven't been able to re-engineer his best creations. Now, eventually, René became consumed with saving the world from his vision of destruction that he had calculated, by whatever means necessary. And Jacob went with him, eventually gaining the ability to become an iniquitous Baptist. Alain and Marianne joined the Maréchal Phantom and assisted the government, including Neuvillette, in taking down René and his Nazissenkreuz Order operatives, who I might add may still exist and were hidden all over the world. During a momentous fight inside of the carcass of Elinus, the gold creation that had plagued Fontaine back in the Cataclysm, the 4 former friends were face to face again, and Lyris, who René had brainwashed into helping him, was there too. A massive explosion happened inside of Elinus that killed a whole lot of personnel, and a few extremely key events happened. Clockwork mecha pieces flew all over the place and were embedded in the flesh of Elinus the dragon. At the same time, Lyris the Oceanid was blown apart as well. she and Marianne somehow merged consciousness, which is said to happen if a person, probably only a Fontanian, dies in an Oceanid's arms. Nazissenkreuz fell into a hole that it's implied led to the Primordial Sea, and Alan and Jacob escaped mostly intact. Elenas's undying nature, because he's from the Abyss, the screws and bolts from the Clockwork Mecha, and the mysterious life-giving energies of an Oceanid gave rise to the Melazines, which is why they all have tokens that they say they had since birth, which are all screws and bolts. The painter Melazine Mimir's token actually belongs to the personal bodyguard dog that Alan made for his beloved sister, which was with her when she and Lyris died. Lyris and Marianne merged, as I said, and have been living as a unique Oceanid ever since, although no one actually knew this. When the traveler ends up solving the entire mystery at the end of the Nazissenkreuz questline, Marianne and Lyris leave their safe haven in the old orphanage to travel the world. Two specific interesting stops she mentions wanting to visit are Hyperborea and Arcadia, Kaeya's supposedly fictional place where his grandfather hid a magical sword. Now, all this being said, I'm reasonably certain that Marianne isn't Sandrone, but Alan being the only one of the group left, not knowing what happened to his sister, having sunken into melancholy and believing his treasured machines to be the only things in the world that can be trusted, he probably did something. Something like design and build an impeccable puppet in the shape of his dear sister as he remembered her. Sandrone may not be actual Marianne, but I do think she could be a puppet of her. She definitely believes in her machines more than anything else. She idolizes Alan and says he spoke to her in his old age. Strangely enough, when recounting his story, Sandrone didn't mention his sister at all, even though Marianne was definitely number one in his life, probably because no one actually knew what happened to her. The spinning key on Sandrone's back may be a cool aesthetic, but it could be an actual key. And if she can create the highly advanced Catherine's, and yet believes Alan's work to be on a level of its own, then he would definitely have been able to make a puppet nearly as advanced as Scaramouche. It's strange the way she simply dumped all this information on us, though, isn't it? It's almost as though she really wanted us to understand his story. And you know something else? I think she's afraid of Dotori. As every puppet, or better yet, everything with any research value should be. Even Arlecchino thanked Columbina for keeping quiet about her connection to the Crimson Moon at first, lest she be subjected to experiments. If Crimson Moon children are like the Fae of Nodkrai, like I said, then she definitely would have had research appeal. Sandrone seems reluctant to mention Dotori, and is glad that he's left for now. So, I get the impression he gives her the creeps. And now that we've learned a bit more about him from his encounter with Thoth, the Ibis King, it stands to reason that it is a very unpleasant thing to be at his mercy. After everything we've seen of the Harbingers and how much they've grown over the years, I'm confident that he is by far the most amoral of them all. We learned a lot about Khaenri'ah in particular while doing these quests. And you know what? I'm going to be paying a lot more attention to the sneaky hints that Kaeya's been giving us about Khaenri'ah over the years. First, he told us about the sinners in a flippant little comment. He got Abyss operatives to simply tell him who their leader is way back in the beginning of the game. And there's also his cheeky line about being connected to the royal family because of his eye patch. But we know King Ermin and the Regent King and Fortress Alberic, who I think was another pillar of Khaenri'ah, were both missing an eye. But the funniest one is his specialty food of meat and mushroom skewers. He even puts a little star of Khaenri'ah on it when he makes it, and it sounds a lot like the meat and mushroom skewers that were all the rage in Khaenri'ah in Rerir's days, even though Rerir didn't seem very fond of them. The more we learn, the more it can't be refuted that Kaeya spent his early life in Khaenri'ah. But we still don't know what time frame he existed in, or why he was sent away. Finding the answer to these secrets is half of what keeps me coming back. Anyway, we honestly learned a lot during these quests, and we still haven't even really touched on what the other factions in Nodkrai are up to, like the witches and the knights. I have this little theory that Varka and his merry band of knights from a religious order, just like the Knights Templars of the real world, are looking for the Holy Grail in Nodkrai, and that it has less to do with grasping the actual moon and more to do with an event that will happen when the moon is closest to Teyvat, which Lauma tells us is a very special time. But that's a topic for another video. For now, I hope you all enjoyed, even though it was super long. Give me a like, definitely subscribe for more, and comment down below with your thoughts so we can start a discussion. And I'll see you in the next one.